She had been married for 40 years. 40 years of breakfasts made, of birthdays remembered, of arguments resolved and silences endured, and a love that had become, over the decades, less a feeling and more a geography, the landscape of a life so familiar she had stopped noticing it. Then her husband died, and the lawyers told her he had left her nothing, not the house, not the accounts, not the investments she hadn't known existed, nothing except one thing, a key, old brass, with an address scratched into the metal in handwriting she recognized as her husband's, but from decades ago, when his hand was steadier and the letters were sharper. An address she had never heard of, a house no one knew existed, and what she found inside it changed everything she thought she had known about the man she had loved for 40 years. Her name was Margaret Helen Caldwell, 67 years old, 5'4". Grey hair that she wore short and neat, the way she'd worn everything in her life, with a quiet precision that had nothing to do with vanity and everything to do with the belief that how you presented yourself to the world was a form of respect for others, for yourself. She had been born in a small town, raised by a mother who worked double shifts, and a father who read to her every night regardless of how tired he was. She had gone to university on a scholarship, the first in her family. She'd studied literature, loved it deeply, and then set it aside at 23 when the practical world had made its requirements clear. She had met Arthur Caldwell at a dinner party she almost hadn't attended. He was 30 years old, an engineer, not the glamorous kind, but the quiet, methodical kind, who understood how things worked at a level most people never bothered to reach. He had dark hair and careful eyes, and a habit of listening to people completely before responding that she had found in a world of interrupters remarkable. They had talked for 4 hours. He had called the next day. They were married 11 months later. For 40 years, Margaret had been Arthur's wife. Not only that, she had her own life, her own friendships, her own opinions that she expressed with a directness that Arthur had always said was one of the things he loved most about her. She had worked, first as a librarian, then as a school administrator, then as a literacy coordinator for the county, until she retired at 62. But at the center of everything, beneath the work, the friendships, the ordinary, extraordinary texture of a full life, was Arthur. He had been the fixed point, the thing everything else orbited around, and then, on a Tuesday morning in March, he had kissed her goodbye before his morning walk, the same walk he had taken every day for 20 years. The same route, the same time, the same quiet exit that had become as reliable as sunrise, and he had not come back. A cardiac event, the doctors said. Sudden, painless, they believed. He would not have known. Margaret had sat in the hospital corridor and listened to those words, and felt the particular unreality of news that is too large for the brain to process immediately. She had answered questions, she had called her daughter, she had done the things that needed to be done, and then she had gone home to a house that was completely silent for the first time in 40 years. The reading of the will took place 3 weeks after the funeral. Margaret had not been worried about it. Arthur had been a careful man, a planner. She had assumed in the vague. unexamined way that people assume things about futures they cannot quite imagine, that everything would be in order. The house, the savings, the pension, the small investment portfolio that Arthur had managed quietly for decades. She had assumed it would all simply continue, in her name now, instead of both of theirs. A painful transition, but a clear one. She sat across from the solicitor, a young man named Harris, who had the particular manner of someone delivering bad news so regularly that he had developed a professional distance from it, and listened to him read, and understood within the first 2 minutes that nothing was as she had assumed. The house was mortgaged. Not the small, manageable mortgage of people who had bought decades ago and weren't nearly done. A large one. Refinanced, she learned with growing incomprehension, 4 times in the last 15 years. The equity she had believed they had built, the equity Arthur had mentioned vaguely on the rare occasions money came up, was almost entirely gone. The savings accounts she knew about had a combined total of £11,000. The investment portfolio, which Arthur had managed himself, which she had never looked at closely because he had always handled the finances and she had trusted that completely, had been liquidated 3 years ago. The funds transferred somewhere she could not immediately trace. Where did it go? She asked. Her voice was steady. She was proud of that. Later. The portfolio. Where did it go? Harris looked uncomfortable. But, he said carefully, something we're still in the process of tracing, Mr. Caldwell's. Financial records are somewhat complex. Complex, she repeated. There are several accounts we were not previously aware of, he said. The process of establishing a complete picture may take some time. Margaret looked at him. 40 years of marriage. 40 years of trust so complete, she had never thought to question it. 40 years of Arthur handling the finances because he was good with numbers and she was good with words, and they had divided the world that way without ever formally deciding to. What am I left with? She asked. Harris told her. The house, with the mortgage attached, 11,000 inaccessible savings, a small widow's pension, and 1 other item, listed at the bottom of the personal effects inventory. 1 brass key, provenance unknown, found in the deceased's study desk, lower left drawer. She almost didn't take it. It was such a small thing. Among the papers and the folders and the weight of everything she was trying to understand, a key seemed almost irrelevant, but something made her pick it up. It was old, older than she would have expected, the brass worn smooth in places from handling. Not a house key, too small for that. Not a safe key, something in between. And scratched into the flat of the key, carefully, in small letters, the kind Arthur made when he was being precise, was an address, 14 Linden Road, Ashworth. She turned the key over in her hand. Ashworth was a village, 40 miles from the city where they had lived for 35 years. She'd been there once, briefly, decades ago, a day trip to a country market, Arthur driving. Both of them younger than she could clearly remember being. She did not recall 14 Linden Road. She did not recall Arthur having any connection to Ashworth. She put the key in her coat pocket and went home. That night, she sat at the kitchen table, Arthur's chair empty across from her, the silence of the house pressing against everything, and turned the key over and over in her hands. She thought about calling her daughter, about calling the solicitor, about finding a sensible, practical way to investigate this strange small object. Instead, the next morning she got in the car and drove to Ashworth. The village was quiet in the way that small English places are quiet in early spring, not empty, but unhurried, the pace of things set by something older than efficiency. She found Linden Road without difficulty. It was a short street at the edge of the village. Older houses, stone cottages mostly, well maintained, the kind of street where people knew their neighbors and the hedges were cut with care. Number 14 was at the end. She sat in the car outside it for a long time before getting out. It was not large, a stone cottage, 2 stories, with a garden that had clearly been tended until recently and had begun, in the way of untended gardens, to make its own decisions. Roses along the front wall, not yet in bloom. A wooden gate, painted blue, that needed repainting. The house looked lived in, or recently lived in, not abandoned, not empty in the way of places long forgotten. She opened the gate, walked up the path, put the key in the lock. It turned on the first try. The door swung open, and Margaret Caldwell stepped into a house she had never known existed. The hallway smelled of old paper and wood polish and something she couldn't name, something that felt disturbingly familiar. She stood just inside the door for a long moment. The house was furnished. Not grandly, simply, carefully, in the way of someone who had chosen each thing because it was right, rather than because it was impressive. Good furniture, books, many books, in shelves along the hallway wall, a coat rack with nothing on it, a small table with a lamp. She moved slowly through the hallway to the sitting room on the left. More books, a fireplace with a clean grate, 2 armchairs positioned at an angle to each other and to the fire, the position of people who sit together and talk. A side table with a lamp, and on the lamp's base, a crack that had been carefully repaired with what looked like epoxy, the kind of invisible mend that someone makes on something they intend to keep. She recognized that crack. She recognized it because she had been there when it happened, 19 years ago. A house move. A box dropped. The lamp, a wedding gift from Arthur's mother, had cracked at the base, and Arthur had spent an afternoon repairing it so carefully that you could barely see the join. But she could see it, because she knew where to look. She sat down in one of the armchairs. Her hands, she noticed, were shaking. The lamp was here, in a house she had never known existed, in a village 40 miles from the home they had shared. She stood up, made herself continue. The kitchen was at the back, clean. A small table with 2 chairs, cupboards with food still inside, dry goods, tins, the kind of stores you keep in a house you use regularly. She opened each cupboard. The brand of tea Arthur drank. The particular brand, not the one she bought, the one he claimed was exactly the same, but always bought separately when he did the shopping. She had teased him about it for 30 years. It was here, in a kitchen she had never seen. She closed the cupboard, stood very still, and tried to understand what she was standing inside. The study was upstairs. Small room at the back of the house, overlooking the garden. A desk, solid, old, the kind built to last rather than to impress. A chair. Shelves of files and folders, organized with Arthur's characteristic precision. A photograph on the desk. She crossed the room and picked it up. It was her. A photograph of Margaret, younger, perhaps 50, in the garden of their house in the city, laughing at something outside the frame. She recognized the day from her clothes. A summer Sunday, their daughter's birthday. She sat down at the desk and began to look at the files. They were organized by year. Going back, she counted, 32 years. She pulled the oldest one. Inside, property documents. The purchase of 14 Linden Road, Ashworth. 32 years ago. In Arthur's name alone. She put it down, picked up another, and another. The files were financial records, but not the kind she had been shown by the solicitor. These were different. A separate set of accounts, not hidden exactly, but completely separate from everything she had known about their financial life. She spent 2 hours at that desk, going through file after file. Understanding, assembling itself slowly, piece by piece, like a picture emerging from fog. Arthur had been saving, not from her, or not only from her, from everything. From the tax system through structures she couldn't fully follow but that had clearly been constructed with considerable care. From the financial obligations of a life by routing money through accounts that existed in a separate, parallel record that she had never known about. For 32 years, she found the summary in the most recent file. A single sheet. Arthur's handwriting. Dated 18 months ago. A list of accounts. A list of assets. A total at the bottom. She read the number 3 times. Then put the paper down, then picked it up again. The total across the accounts, across the assets, across 32 years of careful, methodical, secret accumulation was £4,700,000. Beneath the summary sheet, in an envelope with her name on it, just Margaret, in Arthur's handwriting, the letters slightly larger than his usual script, as if he had wanted to make sure she saw it, was a letter. She held it for a long time before opening it. The paper inside was folded 3 times, several pages, dense with Arthur's careful handwriting. The letters smaller here, the writing of someone with much to say and a finite amount of space in which to say it. She began to read, Margaret. If you are reading this, it means I ran out of time before I was ready. I had hoped to tell you this in person. I had planned the conversation many times and could never find the version that felt adequate, so perhaps this is better. You always said I expressed myself more clearly in writing than in speech. You were right about that, as you were right about most things. I need to explain what you have found. I need to explain it fully, because you deserve a full explanation. And because I am aware that what I am about to tell you will require you to understand something that I was never able to say while I was alive. I was afraid, not of you, never of you, of the thing I was trying to protect you from. She looked up from the letter. The garden outside the study window, the roses beginning to bud, the silence of the house around her. She looked back down. 32 years ago, I made a mistake. Not a moral one, or not the kind you may be fearing. I need to say that clearly and immediately, because I know how your mind works, and I know what you will assume before you have read far enough to understand. I made a financial mistake, a significant one. In the early years of my career, before I understood fully what I was involved in, I was part of an engineering consortium that engaged in practices that were, in retrospect, and even at the time, if I had been paying proper attention, fraudulent. I did not initiate it. I did not benefit greatly from it. But I was part of it. When I understood what I had been part of, I left. Immediately, completely, at considerable professional cost. But leaving was not sufficient. The people I had worked with were not people who accepted departure easily. I was told, directly, clearly, without room for misunderstanding, that my silence had a price. That price was financial and ongoing. For as long as they chose to collect it, for 15 years I paid. She stopped reading, read those 2 sentences again. For 15 years I paid. The mortgage, refinanced 4 times, the investment portfolio liquidated, the savings that should have been more. It had not been carelessness, it had been extortion. She kept reading. I could not tell you. I want to call my because I could not tell you is not sufficient, and you deserve more than that. I could not tell you because telling you would have made you a target. The people I was paying were not theoretical. They had demonstrated on 2 occasions I will not describe in detail that their threats were not empty. Telling you would have put you in danger. I chose to carry it alone rather than share it with you and make you carry it too. I know what you will say to this. I know because I have had this argument with myself for 15 years. You will say it was my choice to make for myself, but not for you. You will say that 40 years of partnership means sharing the weight. You will say that you were strong enough to carry it. You are right on every count, but I was afraid. And fear, I have learned, does not always respond to reason. She set the letter down, stood up, walked to the window, looked at the garden. Her hands had stopped shaking. Something else had replaced the shaking. A clarity, cold and absolute, that comes when the story you have been living in turns out to have had a second chapter you were never shown. She went back to the letter. The payments stopped 12 years ago. The man who had been collecting them died. The consortium he had controlled fractured without him. The threat which I had lived with for 15 years as a constant, low-level presence, like a sound you learn to stop hearing, was simply gone one morning. I should have told you then. I know that. I have always known that. But by then, the habit of carrying it alone was so established that I did not know how to put it down, and I was ashamed. Not of what had been done to me. I had come to understand slowly that I was a victim of it, not a willing participant. But of the 15 years of silence, of the lie by omission that had run through our marriage like a wire, I had learned not to touch. So I did what I knew how to do. I planned. For 20 years, the 20 years since the payments stopped, I have been rebuilding what was taken, carefully, methodically, using the skills I had always had, applied now entirely for you. This house was the beginning. I bought it 32 years ago, before the payments began, when I still believed I could build something solid. When the payments came, I protected it. It was the one thing I would not give them, a place that was safe, a place that was ours, even if you didn't know it yet. Everything in this house I chose for you. The lamp, I know you remember the lamp. The armchairs are the kind you always said you preferred to the ones we had. The books in the shelves are every book you ever mentioned wanting to read and then forgot you'd mentioned. I have been building this place for you for 32 years. I had planned to bring you here on our 45th anniversary, 5 years from now. I had planned to tell you everything, to give you the accounts, the letter, the explanation I owed you, and this house, which has always been yours, even when you didn't know it existed. I ran out of time. I am sorry for that. I am sorry for many things, but not for the saving, and not for this house, and not for the afternoon I spent fixing your mother's lamp, because I knew it mattered to you, and I intended to give it back to you one day in a room you would love. The accounts are yours, all of them. The documentation is in the files. Harris has a sealed letter from me that explains the legal structure. Call him and give him the reference number on the back of this envelope. Live well, Margaret. You have always deserved better than I gave you. You have always deserved someone who was not afraid. I love you. I have loved you since that dinner party. I will love you in whatever comes after this. Arthur. She finished the letter, folded it along its original creases, put it back in the envelope, and sat for a long time in the chair at Arthur's desk, in the study of the house he had built for her over 32 years, in the village 40 miles from their home, with the garden visible through the window and the silence of a place that had been waiting a very long time for her to arrive. She called Harris that afternoon. From the kitchen of the cottage, sitting at the table with 2 chairs, Arthur's particular brand of tea in a cup she found in the cupboard. Harris, when she gave him the reference number from the envelope, was quiet for a moment. "I have been holding this letter for 18 months, he said. "Mr. Caldwell left instructions that it was only to be referenced if you found the key. And if I hadn't found it," another pause. "There was a secondary instruction," Harris said carefully, "that if the key was not retrieved within 1 year of his death, I was to contact you directly and tell you where to look." She absorbed this. Arthur planning. Even the contingencies of his contingencies. "How long will the transfer process take?" she asked. "Given the documentation he left," Harris said, and she could hear something in his voice that was almost admiration, "it is remarkably complete. I would estimate 4 to 6 weeks for the primary accounts. The property transfer is straightforward. The house is unencumbered." "Unencumbered," she repeated. "No mortgage. No charges. It was protected from the financial difficulties of the intermediate period, held in a separate structure." She looked around the kitchen, the cupboards, the 2 chairs, the particular quality of light through the back window in the afternoon. "I'll need," she said slowly, "a structural survey. And a gardener. The roses need attention." A pause. "Of course," said Harris. She finished the call, sat in the kitchen for a while longer. Then she called her daughter. Her daughter's name was Claire, 41 years old, a teacher, practical and warm in the way of people who had been raised by practical, warm people. She had taken her father's death hard, not dramatically but deeply, in the way of someone who has lost a fixed point and is still recalibrating. Margaret told her everything: the key, the drive to Ashworth, the house, the files, the letter. Claire was silent for a long time when she finished. "He built it for you," she said finally. Her voice was strange, not quite steady. "For 32 years. Yes. And the lamp. Yes." Another silence. "Mum," said Claire, "are you all right?" Margaret considered this. She was sitting in the kitchen of a house she had never known existed, owned by a man who had been protecting her from something she hadn't known she needed protecting from, surrounded by 40 years of love expressed in the only way he had known how to express it, when he was afraid. "I don't know yet," she said honestly. "I think I will be." "Are you angry with him?" She thought about this for a long time. "I am," she said, "for the silence, for the 15 years, for the decision he made alone that he should have made with me. But," she said, "I also know that fear does not always respond to reason, and that people who love you do not always protect you in the ways you would choose." A pause. "He was trying to keep me safe. He was wrong about the method. He was not wrong about the intention." Claire was quiet. "Can I come and see it?" she asked. "The house? I was hoping you would," said Margaret. "Come Saturday. I'll have the roses sorted by then." She heard her daughter laugh, a real laugh, the kind that has some tears in it. "He chose the armchairs for you," Claire said. "He knew which kind you preferred." "He always knew," said Margaret. "He just didn't always say." Spring came to Ashworth the way it comes to small English villages, quietly. Without announcement, the roses along the front wall of number 14 bloomed a deep pink in the third week of April, later than Margaret had expected, earlier than the gardener had predicted. She was there to see them. She'd been spending more time at the cottage. Not because the city house was unlivable. It wasn't, and she had begun the process of settling the mortgage and making decisions about its future with the calm efficiency of someone who had more options than she had believed 3 months ago. But because this place, this house that had been built for her over 32 years by a man who had been afraid, felt like something she needed to understand from the inside. She'd read all the books in the shelves, not all of them yet. There were many, but she had started, systematically, in the order Arthur had arranged them, which she had eventually realized was not alphabetical or chronological, but something else, something she was still decoding. She had found, on a Tuesday morning in May, that the order was significant. Every 7th book was one she had mentioned specifically, in conversation over the years. Books she had said she wanted to read and then forgotten she had said it. Arthur had not forgotten. He had written in pencil on the inside cover of each of those books the date she had mentioned it. Some went back 15 years. One went back to the early years of their marriage, a novel she had mentioned once, briefly, at a dinner party, and not thought of since. He had been listening. For 40 years he had been listening. She sat in the garden on a Saturday afternoon in May, Claire beside her, both of them with tea, and thought about what it meant to be known. Truly known. Not perfectly. Arthur had not been perfect. The silence had cost them both something that could not be returned. But known. The way only someone who has been paying attention for 40 years can know you. "What will you do with it?" Claire asked. "The house. Will you keep it?" Margaret looked at the roses, at the blue gate that she had repainted herself 2 weeks ago, on a bright cold morning, with a tin of paint she had chosen from the same shade Arthur had used. "It was built for me," she said. "I think I'll live in it." Claire looked at her. "Are you happy, Mum?" Margaret thought about the letter, about the lamp, about the particular brand of tea in the cupboard and the books in the shelves, and 32 years of love expressed in the only language Arthur had been able to speak when he was afraid. About the 40 years. The good ones and the hard ones, and the long, silent middle ones, and the ordinary Sunday mornings that had seemed, at the time, like nothing much. "I think," she said carefully, "that I'm learning something about love that I didn't know I needed to learn." A pause. That it is not always simple. That it does not always look the way you expect. That sometimes the person who loves you most is the person who couldn't tell you everything. She looked at the roses. "And I think," she said, "that I'm going to be all right." She meant it, because sometimes the person who leaves you has spent a lifetime making sure that you will be.